Day is the 21st day of the month of Kislev, and that is on Do Not Disturb. Go. And we are finishing up the sixth parak of Maseches Pesachim, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, continuing from the bottom of Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, right at the bottom of the page, finishing up today with Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Beis, where the Gemara told us on Ayin Aleph Amud, Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, a din of Rav. Rav Huna quoted Rav telling us that with regards to an asham that is nitak l'ria, that is sent off to pasture, that you shechted it stam, it's kosher la'ola, which means, and this is the imperative din that Rav is teaching us, loy bari akira, that once a korban defaults to a particular position, it doesn't need to be explicitly stated to have changed. The owners don't need to say something's changed about this korban. Once it defaults, it defaults. And it can be used as that purpose. And now we are going to see how this connects back to our Mishnah. Because our Mishnah taught us a din of shachtov v'noida shemashchu balim is yadam. What happens if the korban pesach was shechted and thereafter the balim were the person shechting it found out that the balim said, we don't want to be part of this korban pesach anymore. That was the case that our Mishnah was speaking about, and that is going to be Rav Chista's disagreement with Rav. So yesterday we saw how Rav's din was presented, and now we're going to see what this has to do with our Mishnah. Second to last line of Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph says Rav Chista as follows: Rav Chista disagreed. Le Rav Huna to Rav Huna, who had quoted Rav. If you shechted the korban pesach and then you found out that the balim had pulled away from this korban pesach, it doesn't have owners anymore. V'tari Allah at the top of Ayin Gimel Amud Beis that we said about this, and Mishnah says, B'chol, in such a case, meaning V'tari Allah of this case of our Mishnah, what are you supposed to do with this korban now? B'chol, if it was a weekday, ki hai gavna, Yisarf miyad. If this happened during the week, you have to burn this korban immediately. Meaning it's a korban that doesn't have owners anymore, and therefore it's not a korban pesach, or maybe it is. We'll see. But it needs to be burnt immediately. And now is where the challenge to Rav comes. And if you were to tell me that it needs akira, that it needs to be actively changed, meaning what is this korban now? It's not a korban pesach anymore because it doesn't have balim. So this would then default to a korban shlamim. Would default to a korban shlamim. So I amart bishlama bayakira hay pesach who if it needs akira, if it needs to be undone as a korban pesach, so no undoing happened. Hay pesach who this is now still a korban pesach. V'kevan delays le balim, and since it doesn't have any owners, havele psul b'gufay. It is now an inherent psul within this korban. This is machlokas that we saw a while back in the Masechta. It's now or discussion that we saw earlier in the Masechta. It's now an inherent psul within this korban, and an inherent psul within the korban needs to be burnt immediately. Onto lahachi yisar miyad. Because of that, it should be burnt immediately. But if you tell me that it doesn't need a akira, it doesn't need to be verbally, consciously unmade from being a korban pesach. Well, then the moment that its balim withdrew, it defaults to a shlamim. And then psulim mishumai. And what is the psul of this korban? Meaning the psul of this korban is now something other than the fact that it's a korban pesach that doesn't have balim. What exactly is this psul? It means that it's no longer an inherent psul, it is now a tangential psul. And the halacha is, Rashi points this out, that with regards to an inherent psul, that's where you burn it immediately. But if it's a tangential psul, the psul is coming as a result of some other condition, not as a result of this korban itself. But there's some other circumstantial thing that's happened that renders this korban invalid. In such a case, then you don't burn it immediately. You wait until uber tzura, where it has to have changed some kind of shape so that it doesn't look like you are being denigrating and desecrating kachim. Says the Gemara, Mishum davar acher. It has to be because of something else. What is the psul now? The ka shachid le achar tamid shel ben arabayim. The psul of this shlamim is that it was shechted after the Tamid of Bein Arabayim, which is not an inherent psul in the karban, but it is a tangential psul. It's an extraneous psul to this karban. And then ibul tzurabai. Now you would need it to sit around and change its form a little bit to not look like a fresh karban. The Tanya, because we taught in the Braisa, says Zakal, this is the rule. Kol psula begufa yisarv miyad. Anything that the psul is inherent within it has to be burnt immediately. Bedam of a balim, if the problem was in the blood was spilt, or the balim became tameh, or it lost its owners, or whatever it might be. To uber tzurasai, it has to lose its form, and then it gets burnt, which is a direct contradiction to what Rav had told us. Meaning, what Rav has told us is that once a karban defaults, it doesn't need to actively be made into this new karban. Whatever the default is, it doesn't need the owners to say anything. Says the word Ella loisema, shachta stab kasher l'shum oila. So rather, you have to conclude loisema shachta stab. Don't say the din of Rav, meaning what Rav Huna told us the din of Rav is shachta stab kasher l'shum oila. If you shechted it without any words, it's good for an oila. Ela you have to say that what Rav was meaning was shachta l'shum oila kosher. If you shechted it as an oila, it's kosher. Meaning, if the guy came along and shechted it, at least for the intention of an oila, it's going to be kosher as an oila. Alba bayi akira, which means that it needs akira. That Rav agrees that it needs akira. Meaning, we undid Rav Huna's statement to the name of Rav. Says the Gemara as follows. Well, okay, that might fly well if you're going to reinterpret Rav. But what about the din of Rabbi Chia bar Gabda? The Amar who told us that it was said from the mouths of everybody in the Chabura, everybody in the Mishnah says. They said, what would be in a case if all of the owners became Tamei Meis and were all bumped off to Pesach Sheni? Meaning, all of the owners, somebody they were on their way to the Beis Hamikdash and they had their korban there, and then all of a sudden somebody dropped dead under a tree in front of them. Now all of them are out to Meis. Hi, who debay akira? They need akira. They would need akira there. Ha be'alba loy bay akira. That seems to imply that in general you don't need akira. In general, you don't need akira. In this case, you would need akira. You would need an active undoing of this karban from a karban Pesach to a karban Shlama. But in general, you wouldn't. What are you going to say about this din of Chia bar Gabda? Ella Amar Rav Huda Bereder Rav Yeshua says Rav Huda the name of Rav Yeshua. What are we talking about here? What are we talking about is that you have a situation that they separated the karban Pesach before Chatzos, before midday and Erev Pesach. And the owners died after Chatzos, or they abandoned the korban after Chatzos. The Havale, in such a case, it would be nira v'nidche, that it was fitting, it was appropriate to be used as a korban, v'nidche, and only after it was ready to be used as a korban, only thereafter v'nidche, it was pushed away. V'chol hanira v'nidche shuv enachos v'nira. And anything that is nira, that is seed, that's available, v'nidche, and then gets pushed away, meaning it was ready to be used as a korban, the time had come for it to be used as a korban, then something happened, shuv enachos v'nira, cannot become eligible for a korban again, lichora, meaning that it would need something in order to be used. Says the Gemara, meaning who time el Rav. Yeah, but that reasoning, meaning if we're effectively trying to save Rav's original statement by pointing out that Rav Chia bar Gabda, as Rav Huda Bereder Rav Yeshua explains, tells us that it is possible to have a case where you are going to, where you're still going to say that akira is not necessary. Says the Gemara, Midi hu taime ela Rav, but this now works for Rav, except for the fact that for Rav, this case doesn't make sense. Why? Ha'amar Rav, because Rav is uniquely of the opinion that Balei Chaim enam nidchim, that Balei Chaim, a live animal, is never nidche. it's only after you shechted the animal that if something were to have gone wrong, that it would be nidche. This is the Gemara on the Tani Ches is going to go into great detail about this. But it's only after it's shechted that you would have this din of shuv einoi nira. But as long as the animal is still alive, this din doesn't apply. Which means that for Rav, he wouldn't be able to explain Rabbi Chia bar Gabda as talking about a case of if the Balim died only after Chatzos. So for Rav, he would you still have the issue of Chia bar Gabda saying that, or at least implying that all of the Chachamim of the Beis Medrash hold that Ba'al Meloi Ba'yi Akira, which is exactly Rav's point. So how are you going to explain this according to Rav and now according to Chia bar Gabda, within Rav's opinion? However, Rav Balichaim Edim Didchin. Ella Amar Rav Papa says, Rav Papa, Ha Mani Rabbi Eliezer. This must be the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. De Amar, who says as follows: V'chein hashechet acherim l'shem Pesach pasol. If you shechted another korban for the sake of a korban Pesach, it's going to be pasol. That's what Rav is talking about. Meaning, if you shechted any other korban, this is the what we have in our Mishnah, Machlokes Rabbi Shua and Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that if you shechted another korban, meaning it has defaulted to a shlamim, and you shechted it thinking that it was a korban Pesach, it's pasol. That's what's going on here. That's the whole case, and that now explains why it's going to be pasol, and it's no contradiction to Rav, because this would explain that it is inherently pasol. And since it's inherently possible, it should be burnt immediately. Even though nobody went to be oikeret, because it was a korban that was defaulted to a shlamim without akira, and it was shechted l'shem Pesach, which renders it completely possible, inherently possible, because it was shalom lishma. Says the Gemara, this is now an inherent psul. Says the Gemara, v'i Rabbi Eliezer, if this is in fact Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, sachatas nami v'chayev. Then Rav would have to agree that in such a case where you have a korban Pesach that the Balim removed themselves from and it defaulted to a shlamim, and then it was shechted as a korban Pesach. In according to Rabbi Eliezer, not only would it be a psul begufay, which would explain why it gets burnt immediately, but you would also be chayiv a korban chatas. Why? Because Rabbi Eliezer doesn't believe in the principle of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Meir, that toy b'davar mitzvah pater, that if you made a mistake while doing a mitzvah, you'd be pater. Meaning, then we'd have to explain this whole mahalach according exclusively to Rabbi Eliezer. Says the Gemara, Ela tirguma Rav Yosef berei de Rav Salah Chasida, coming to Rav Papa. Rather, Rav Yosef, the son of Rav Salah Chasida, said in front of Rav Papa, Hani mili Yosef ben Chonai. These words are the words of Yosef ben Chonai. What was the din of Yosef ben Chonai? Ditnan, we have a Mishnah that Yosef ben Chonai Omer, he tells us, Hani shchatim l'shem Pesach l'shem chatas psulim. Anything that is shechted for the sake of a Pesach, l'shem chatas, and for the sake of a chatas, are all going to be possible. That is the din of the Gemara in Zvachim Daf base of an Aleph. That anything that is shechted, meaning anything that's not a Pesach, that's shechted l'shem Pesach, and anything that's not chatas, that's shechted l'shem chatas, is inherently possible. Which means that you don't need Rabbi Eliezer. This is a din of Yosef ben Chonai. He holds that this is inherently possible. It's inherently possible. That's why it's going to be burnt immediately, even though it doesn't need akira. Alma that comes out, it implies psul beguvay, that the psul is inherent within the korban, and that's why it has to be burnt up immediately. Peture, someone like Rabbi Yeshua. And with regards to being potter from the korban chatas, we can still hold like Rabbi Yeshua. Rav can still hold like Rabbi Yeshua, and Yosef ben Chonai can also hold like Rabbi Yeshua. Says the Gemara, Rav Ashi says, Rav the Amar Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Maybe we have another answer here. Rav holds like the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. The Tanya, we have a brayso as follows: Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, that Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, teaches. Omer, Im Yeshus b'yom leidai mashchubalim is yidehem, If there was enough time in the day for the Baalim, for the Shechter of the Karban to have done his research, to have figured out, were the Baalim still interested in this Karban? Did they die? Did they become Tameh? Meaning, to send somebody to check, is this, just before you check this Karban, is this the right thing to do? If there was enough time for him to do this, and he didn't, and it turned out that those conditions were not met, chayev. That's where he'd be chayev, meaning he would have to bring korban chatas. Utu uber tzurasai v'yes lebeis hasreifa. And in those cases, it's true. Then to uber tzurasai, then it needs the korban that you shechted would need to have its form change. You'd have to wait until it looked like it wasn't a good korban anymore. V'yes lebeis hasreifa, and then it would get burnt afterwards. My timer. What's the reason for this? It seems to me that it doesn't need Akira. This would be a dead giveaway, like Rav. That Rabbi Yochanan, the son of Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, is telling you that it doesn't need Akira. It does not need Akira. Meaning, in the case of, if there wasn't enough time in the day, then you wouldn't need to Uber Tzurasa, and you could burn it immediately. Says the Gemara, challenging Rav Ashi, says, no, hold on a second. Maybe because Rabbi Yishmael ben Oishel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka holds like the Tana of the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Bar Avua, the Amar, who says, "Afilu pigul nami by Yibutzura," who holds that even pigul, which is the most biggest psul in the goof of the korban that you can possibly have, pigul is this thing is now no longer able to be used as a korban. Afilu pigul nami by Yibutzura. There is such a shita that everything needs Ibur Tzura. The Yonaf oven minosa, because he learns Xerashav of the word oven and oven from the din of Nosar. Nosar has inherent Ibur Tzura, and maybe all Kabbalahs need to have Ibur Tzura. The Ilat have a hachi, because if you don't say like that, Nitmu Balim Ma'ikla. What are you going to say about Nitmu Balim? What happens if the owners became Tameh? Havadai by Akira. You would definitely need Akira in such a case, in order to require Ibur Tzura. The Amar B'chir Bar Gabda, because B'chir Bar Gabda told us, in such a case, where the Balim became Tameh, and they were pushed up to Pesach Sheni, so what would you say then, if it was then shechted? So, if you're going to hold that everything requires, that's the case that we're talking about, that the owners are Tamei Meis and are pushed off to bring Pesach Sheni, and then the person shechted the korban, the kohen in the Beis Hamikdash, or some other fellow shechted this korban for the sake of these people that were all pushed off to Pesach Sheni. So this is now a case where it's still a korban Pesach, but it doesn't have anybody holding on to it. So there you would for sure need Akira in order to turn it into a shlamim, and yet, because it doesn't default, because they still want to use it for Pesach Sheni, and in such a case, the Tana Debei Rabbi Bar Avua is going to tell you that it still needs Ibur Tzura, which means that it for sure needs Akira. Nevertheless, says the Gemara, so Rav Ashi's Mahalach here is now rejected. It must be, like we said beforehand, that Rav's opinion goes in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef ben Chanai. Yosef ben Chanai, this is the opinion that Rav is holding by, and Hadran Alach Eilu Dvarim. We have now completed the parak of Eilu Dvarim, and Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach to continue with parak Ketz Tzelin on Daf Ayin Daled tomorrow. Everybody should have a beautiful day, and looking forward to seeing you then.